Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you are in a good position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. So today we have Alex Black on the line. Alex is the President, CEO, and Director of Rio2 Limited. Rio2 is a listed Toronto venture exchange company under the symbol RIO. Mr. Black, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Andrew. Yep. Thanks for having me.
So, Alex, tell us your story and background.
Well, I guess in a nutshell, as you can tell, I'm from Australia originally. I've been living in Lima for nearly 18 years. I've been in the industry nearly just shy of 40 years. I'm a mining engineer by background. Have done several different things in the mining space. I started off as a consultant, started off in the industry in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia back in the early 80s. So that was pretty interesting. Then moved to Perth in the late 80s and started up a consulting business and did quite a bit of consulting for a lot of companies in Australia and obviously those companies that were also doing business outside of the country. And at some point, I decided to cross the fence. I was watching people and working for people who were doing what I do now, and I did a bit of research and spent a bit of time thinking about why those people, in most cases, were successful. And I worked out that really it all came down to being in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And so I decided to cross the fence. I did start up it was private resource company in Australia with some assets in Ghana in West Africa back in the mid-90s. Then BRIEX happened and there was no more money for exploration companies anywhere in the world. And I was asked by one of my fellow directors and also a larger shareholder that, we should look at getting an advanced project into the portfolio. And at that stage, my consulting company was doing some contract work in Kazakhstan. And I met somebody in Kazakhstan. I said, look, do you know of any brownfields projects around? And they told me there was one in Mongolia called the Peru Gold Project. And I said, Jesus, where's Mongolia? And anyway, after a little bit of research and traveling to the country, I found out that, yes, there was a gold project there called Peru. And we took it on. It was in a private company called Rio2 Limited, which was an Australian company. And anyway, we worked our way into the late 90s, and unfortunately, things didn't get much better in the gold space. And in fact, the resource sector went even worse towards the late 90s. And we decided to move the project on after doing feasibility study and actually Centerra bought it, and it became a mine. And Centerra mined Peru for, I think, about 8 years or so. It was a successful mine for them, and I think now it's in closure or it has been closed. So in 2000, I decided to do something different, and the only continent that I hadn't been to up until that point was South America. So I did some research about where I'd like to go to in South America, and Peru came up. So packed up my bags and came over to Peru. And same sort of thing happened. I picked up some assets here in Peru. They were exploration assets, but once again, as you can imagine, the early 2000s, things were just starting to pick up, but very slowly in the resource space. And in 2004, became aware of an asset that belonged to Rio Tinto called Mina Justa. And anyway, we participated in a bid to acquire Mina Justa from Rio Tinto back in 2004. through a company that I controlled at that time called Chariot Resources, which was listed on the TSX. And we won the process. We took on Mina Justa. We did a feasibility study on the project, but once again, ran out of gas sort of around 2010. And this was after I left the company, but the company was sold to a Chinese group who then on-sold it to a Peruvian group called Minsur, which is a listed Peruvian company. And as I speak, they're currently building a $1.5 billion copper project at Mina Justa. So the good thing is about all the things that I've been involved in, they've eventually become something. Whether they've been in my hands or not at the time that they have is another thing. And in 2006, when I left Chariot, I decided to do something different and look for opportunities. And it was just before the financial crisis. And I came across a project and made aware of a project called La Arena, which belonged to IAMGOLD at the time. And La Arena was a discovery that Cambior had made. Cambior had been acquired by IAMGOLD, I think in 2006 or 2005. So it was something that IAMGOLD didn't want to take. So they ran a process. We participated in the process as a private company. That company was Rio2 Mining, which was private at the time. And in late 2007, we were awarded the winner of the process to acquire La Arena. However, we promised to pay IAMGOLD nearly $50 million for the asset. And at that point, getting to the point of putting that money together to pay IAMGOLD, we entered the financial crisis. So we went back to IAMGOLD, said, look, nobody's going to give us money to give to you. Can we restructure this deal into an option earn-in where we do find money, we put money in the ground and we pay you later? And they agreed to that, which was great. And so we started looking for money, and it was very difficult to find money, but we eventually found a listed shell called Mexican Silver Mines. We did virtually a reverse takeover of Mexican Silver Mines. There we were. Mexican Silver Mines had $6 million in the bank. We had the option to acquire La Arena, and post-transaction we were a $12 million company. We then proceeded as quickly as possible to build La Arena, turn it into a mine, and we did that on the basis that we knew Peru. We knew that we knew how to approach the project. We had a Peruvian management team, so we had good intelligence on how we were going to bring that project into production as quickly as possible. And about 2 years later, we poured our first bar of gold in May 2011. 2011. So 2009, late 2009 was when we did the deal with Mexican Silver. 2011 was when we poured gold. Obviously, the gold price was going up at the time. Things were going well. At one point, our share price peaked at $6. Remembering we started as a $12 million company with 20-cent share price, so we did pretty well in growing value. Made a lot of people a lot of money. Then things came off in 2013. Gold price started to come back again, and we were doing well. We were producing 220,000 ounces a year at La Arena, and then we had the opportunity to acquire another company that had an asset about 30 kilometres away from La Arena called Shahuindo. That company was called Saladin Resources, I think the correct name was at the time. And we took over Saladin, put the two companies together, built the value up of the two to about $1.2 billion, and then we were taken over by Tahoe Resources in early 2015.
And now we know the rest of the story.
And then the rest of the story is Rio2. Here I am.
So
it's a long history, but I think it's good for good to be able to tell it, because it shows that everything that I've been involved with, my team's been involved with, is real. We're not promoters. We're real people. We're real miners, and we know what we're looking at.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a good point to reinforce. So now you're up to something else called Rio2. So tell us just briefly, because we're going to talk about it a little bit more later. Tell us about Rio2.
Yeah, Rio2, from the outset, it was all about the fact that I wasn't ready to really retire from what I was doing with Rio Alto. So it was a matter of setting up Rio2. Took over a listed shell called Prospector Resources, populated it with some money. Our management put in quite a slug of it, but we raised about $9 million Canadian, and started to look around for projects. And the idea and the objective of Rio2 is to become a multi-asset precious metals company, focused essentially in the Americas, and that's where we've been looking so far for opportunities.
Okay, and well, you're certainly on your way to doing that with Project Pipeline. You've already got that starting to roll out. So very, very interesting there. So give us just a little bit more on Rio2. Give us for folks who don't know, give us where the project is, and give us just a little bit of info, and then we'll get into it a little bit later.
Okay, with Rio2, once we got off the ground and we became public, we probably looked at about 60 or so projects / junior companies / projects that majors wanted to sell, and got involved in processes, etc. And through that process, we came across a company called Atacama Pacific, which had and discovered the Cerro Maricunga gold project in Chile, in the Atacama region of Chile. And it was a discovery they made in 2010. And so we came across Atacama Pacific. And one of the challenges of doing M&A in the mining space is finding somebody that wants to dance with you, right? So there's lots of companies, assets, etc., out there that you think might make sense to be a part of what we're doing, but typically, you got to find somebody that is willing to dance on the other side. And 90% of mining deals all comes down to social issues, which is, what is everybody getting at the end of the day from a personal perspective after the transaction's done. That's sort of natural. It's a little sad because it does blow up things that should happen, don't happen because of the social issues. But in our case, anyway, we did this deal with Atacama Pacific. I think we closed the transaction where we put the two companies together back in July of this year. And Cerro Maricunga, we decided to rename Phoenix, the Phoenix Gold Project. The reason for that was that the word Maricunga is used in several iterations of company names, of project names in that region. So we wanted to just stay away from the Maricunga name. So we called the project Phoenix, and that's what we talk about. Now, Phoenix, the Atacama Pacific guys discovered it in 2010, did 3 drill campaigns between 2010 and 2013, delineated in resources about 5.5 million ounces of gold in resources. Did a pre-feasibility study in 2014 and defined about 3.7 million ounces in reserves, according to the metrics of the pre-feasibility study. And after our validation of the asset, we thought that was, the asset's real, it's doable, it has a lot of positive characteristics, has a lot of similar characteristics to La Reina, the project that we built in Peru. And so, you know, it was an easy decision for us to say, okay, let's acquire the company for the asset and let's get into it.
Right. Very well. I appreciate the the overview of what's going on there. So moving on, we'll come back to Rio2. So Alex, what is wrong with the mining business these days?
A lot of people have lost patience and faith in the mining space. The resources sector in general, particular emphasis, and obviously something I know best is the gold sector of the resource industry. You know, a lot of things have gone wrong in the gold sector. Value has been destroyed in a lot of cases. Bad management has been in place in a lot of cases. Bad promotion. You know, things that are unfortunate but have spread through to the rest of the sector. And so that, accompanied by what I would call a flattish gold price, because if you look at the gold price, and I've got a chart on my screen right now, if you look at the gold price between you know, 2013 and now, it's relatively flat, around $1,200, right? So it's not as though we've been through massive gyrations over the last 5 years. The price has been relatively stable, but during that time, all the excesses of the previous years have come to roost, and a lot of companies are carrying huge amounts of debt. Management teams are paying themselves a lot of money, a lot of G&A. People don't like that. Investors don't like that, particularly if they're underperforming. Companies are virtually breaking even at the current gold price, which is a bit interesting because, you know, in our case, when we had La Reina, which the average grade of La Reina is less than 0.4 grams overall, we made good money at $1,200. So obviously there are assets in production now that probably shouldn't be in production. Some of these are controlled by bigger companies, you know, some of the bigger companies.
Right.
So all that put together has just worn thin on investors in the space. And what's really shocking to me is, you know, and I've been in this business for nearly 40 years, but also involved in the Canadian publicly listed space since 2002 when I got Chariot Resources off the ground. The whole investment sector has changed, and in a lot of cases, funds have just disappeared. And so the obvious usual places of going to for money are gone. So now it's quite sobering because now I'm involved with a junior company that doesn't have any cash flow, and
right.
you wonder where the hell any more money is going to come from. And it's a very, very difficult situation, and the whole industry faces it. So the good thing is, you know, the good thing for me and my way of thinking is that if this continues, which I kind of think it will for at least a little while, and I'm sort of guessing sort of well into 2019, that hopefully there'll be a bit of a clean out and consolidation of smaller companies. That's really what needs to happen. And let's see if that happens.
Interesting. So you're an Australian citizen. Why is it that Australia, if you look at some of the charts of some of the juniors, mid-tiers, and majors in Australia, they're severely outperforming Canadian, North American, these other equities in the space? What do you think that's attributable to?
Oh, well, you know, the Australian guys are doing well because they're in a you know, they're enjoying the differential of currency between the Australian dollar and US dollar. Australia's become, you know, cost competitive over time because of the constraints of the industry. So I think Australians are people that embrace technology, embrace challenge, and just get on with it, right? When I came to Peru and I did La Arena, I remember people asked me, so how many mines you built in Peru? And I said, none. And then they said, well, how many mines have you built in your life? I said, none. I've been involved in a number of mines, but I've never built one. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to build one here either. And I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a team together and they're going to build the mine. I'm like the coach of the football team. I provide the uniforms, I provide the ball, the boots, and I say, okay, guys, run out on the pitch and go kick goals, right? But I'm not the one who builds the mines. So I think Australians fit in wherever they go, whether it's Africa, whether it's South America, whether it's other places around the world, and we sort of try to fit in, and we meld in with culture of the country that we're doing business in, and the people, and we just get on with things, right? We get on with the job.
Right. Well, I've got to because you said that, I've got to step out and mention that, whether it's John Borjoff at Paladin going out to places in Africa that have never mined and shipped a can of uranium yellow cake out of the country before, you certainly reinforce that fact that Australians can certainly be very good folks to have in this business, and especially and not just in the mining business, but also in advancing these other economies and advancing jobs and local community advancement and so forth. So it's interesting you say that.
Yeah.
So what would you have to say for majors, mid-tiers, and junior companies out there that are trying to form integrity and credibility? What suggestions at this point do you have for them?
It's all about executing and delivering. I guess it's all about getting your hands on something, whether it's an exploration project, if you're an explorationist, if you're a mine builder, trying to find a project you can build. If you're an operator, try and find a project you can operate, and just do the best you can in those circumstances with the resources you've got available to you. Put your head down. Don't get greedy. I think this industry, certainly in the past, has been full of lots of greed. And when I say that, you got to try and get to a position where you own more of the company than, and the value of that ownership equates to many more times than the salary that you're pulling. And I think that goes for majors all the way through. And I think there's been some recent editorials on that about CEO ownership and management ownership of public companies. So, you just have to get on with it, and I find that very frustrating because, we're still on the lookout for opportunities. We're looking for, because our Phoenix project has a gestation period of about 3 years before we get to the construction phase, the decision to construct. So what I'm trying to do with my team is we're looking for other opportunities, near-term production, etc. And it's really hard. It's really hard to find.
Right.
And that's the other thing that's happened in this industry with the lack of sort of funding that's been around for the last few years, particularly since the drop-off of gold from where it was at 1,800 to 1,200, a lack of exploration. So with the lack of exploration comes a lack of new projects, comes a lack of capability to find them. And then if you are lucky to find them, you've got to find the capital to be able to develop them, right? So there's a lot of challenges out there.
Right, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see at these prices and with these sentiment levels that we have right now. It'll be interesting to see what deals you can find in the meantime. So, Alex, last we checked, And I don't know if we're exactly up to date, but you haven't taken a materials salary from the company. So what is your view on industry compensation and those who enjoy mining shareholders instead of the dirt?
Yeah, look, it's all got to be commensurate with what the company's doing. I mean, if the company's making, good money, obviously, as part of a management team, you can earn a salary, you can get paid bonuses, you can get paid in stock, whether it's options or RSUs or whatever it is. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about just doing everything within the context of what your company's doing. And I think that's where things have got out of kilter, because they're, particularly with the bigger guys, is that there's a lot of rumblings about the size of the G&A and salary packages that these guys have in respect to the performance of their companies. So all I can say is, you just got to do it within the capacity of what your company's doing. And if you do that, then not too many people are going to worry about it. But if you put your hands deep into the treasury of the company when it's not doing that well, then investors get pretty wary of what sort of company that might be.
Sure, and we've seen a lot of that recently, where you have companies that are listed and they have projects that require significantly higher prices to even be able to become reasonable, and yet they're nothing but a consumer of capital. And when a CEO or an executive of a company at the higher level is raking in a $700,000 salary, and there's no cash flow whatsoever, it's just laughable.
Yeah, I mean, and really at the end of the day, look, we're all investors in a certain way. You obviously don't. You should choose not to put your money into those sorts of companies. I mean,
agreed.
When I see companies and you see recommendations to buy shares of companies, and a lot of those recommendations are based on the share price. So, and I'm not going to talk about specifics here, but company A may have had a $15 share price. It's now down at $5, and the recommendation from analysts on the street are, you should buy this stock because it's rock bottom and all that. But the reason it's probably there is because of bad management. And so for me, when you invest in a company, you're not buying the shares to go from, in my opinion, from $5 to $15. What you're doing is you're putting that money in and giving it to that management team and trusting that management team to take that share price from $5 to $15, right?
Right.
They are the ones going to steer that company. So if a company's got a bad management team running it, stay away. If people are taking money over and above the capacity of the company, stay away. And even if the share price of that company is rock bottom, stay away from it. There's plenty of other good things that you can invest in apart from those companies, just because of the share price, right? Because at the end of the day, once again, my opinion is you put $1 into an investment, you're backing management, and you better be sure that you are confident that management team is doing the right thing for all shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly at Rio2, it does align quite well with what the stage of the company versus what you guys.
I mean, we're just starting, right? So we've really got to hit our mark and move things along with Phoenix and anything else that we do. So we're at the way at the junior end of the spectrum, but certainly what you're talking about, I think, goes more along to the more development companies / producing companies, small producers, to the bigger guys. You need to be careful and watch what happens to Treasury. That's it.
Right. Because at the end of the day, some of these bad companies, bad management teams, the investors who give them money are just more or less just supporting their lifestyle.
Exactly.
So look out.
Exactly.
let's see, what do we have here? Another thought that came to my head here. So you've spent a good amount of time in Chile and Peru. You've had to deal with various agencies and political figures. What is your take on the newly elected governor in Puno region, Peru?
Well, let's see, because he just got in. That's the first thing. Politics here in Peru are interesting. We had a big scare, the president before last, or two presidents ago, in Ollanta Humala becoming president of this country. I can't remember the year, but anyway, 2013 or something like that. He campaigned on a leftist platform, and then all of a sudden, boom, he governs from the center. And he didn't do anything radical in Peru. There were corruption and other things going on, but that's something that Peru is dealing with right now and trying to clean up. But so I think the jury's still out on that guy who's been elected in Puno. Maybe I'm biased, and I've been here 18 years, and Peru's been through some pretty controversial times during the last 15 of that, since Alberto Fujimori ended his presidency back in the early 2000s. I still think that Peru is probably one of the better countries in South America or Latin America to do business in the mining space. I think the opportunity to mine here is definitely positive. The system of approvals, the approval process that you have to go through to build a mine, the processes that are there to monitor mining, etc., are all pretty transparent, black and white, so they all work. The legal system here works pretty well. Peru's a great place. Chile's obviously a very mature country, being the number one copper producer in the world. There it's a little bit, the dynamics a little bit different because it's more prescriptive. The approval process, the EIA/permitting process, which the government's trying to improve on the bureaucratic processes involved. The Piñera government is trying to instigate some improvements, which hopefully might be in place next year. So, but similar sorts of laws and guidelines to building mines. So, no, Peru and Chile are great. The interesting thing with our Phoenix project, when we build it, when we turn it into a mine, it'll be the only gold oxide heap leach project in Chile, which blows me away because here in Peru there are a few. In Chile there are none, and we will have the first one because the country's been dominated by copper and continues to be dominated by copper. Lithium to a certain extent now that lithium's been running hot, etc. So, and iron ore.
Right. No, it's interesting because the project is very clean, and so it'll be interesting. And then also I noticed you said it's really a when question, not an if question. So that is reinforcing. So aside from these two jurisdictions that we know about that you guys have assets in, you also have some concessions in Nicaragua. What's your plan there, and are you of the opinion that the political trials there will be resolved soon?
Yeah, we've been in Nicaragua over the last couple of years, on a limited basis. We have one person there, a geologist. His name's Luke English. He's been in the country for many years. We've just looked around. We've got an application in place with the government for 10,000 hectares of ground in some areas that we think are pretty interesting. We've been talking to people doing business in Nicaragua, seeing if there's anything we can do together. But Nicaragua, up until the recent civil unrest, really was probably the shining light in Central America as far as we were concerned from a mining perspective. If you look at the countries that surround it, Guatemala, pretty tough, and I know because of the Tahoe experience. Costa Rica is closed for mining. Panama, tough, even though you've got Cobre de Panama being built by First Quantum. There's a moratorium against awarding mining concessions in the country, has been in place for a few years now. So Nicaragua stood out as being a good place, mining friendly. B2 have been very successful in Nicaragua. In fact, they started their business in Nicaragua. That was their first projects that they put together in their company. So, we like Nicaragua. Now, the civil unrest, hey, it's not good. We don't like what we've been hearing, but it is Latin America, and these things happen. I think there'll be some sort of resolution over time. How long, I'm not sure, but it's definitely going to be resolved. I think the country is not Venezuela, is not crazy from that perspective. So I'm hopeful that it does turn around, and when it does, we want to be there. And it's like the old adage of buying low and selling high. Well, you want to be in a country that other people don't want to be in, to take advantage of the opportunities, if you want to be successful. So
right.
I mean, if I was doing business in Africa, place I'd like to be right now is Zimbabwe, probably, because Zimbabwe's been locked up for so long during the Mugabe time. Now it's sort of opening up, and probably that's a good place to be, even though it still hasn't sorted itself out completely. But Zimbabwe is a very, very prospective country in Africa from a mining perspective, and that's probably a very similar analogy to Nicaragua.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly cheap and hated, and I'm not gonna challenge you on the Africa stuff. I tend to lean towards more of a Namibia or a Botswana, but and South Africa is also heading in that direction to where there might be opportunity in the future, and maybe the DRC as well. So back to Nicaragua, I've been there for some time. Haven't been there for 4 years in the country, and the situation we all hope gets resolved soon and in a good manner, and it is sad what's going on there, but hopefully things will improve, and people will kind of figure it out, and hopefully there's not a playbook in line for a Venezuela or another one of those types. But certainly right now there's a heavy discount. Alex, in real estate, for example, I just recently know just a little bit about it. Real estate's got about a 50% haircut. So it is kind of hated at this point, illiquid, but there are some interesting deals, and IM Gold is there, which you are plenty familiar with. B2 is of course there, and they've continued to operate with little disruption from what I've seen. And you got Caliber doing some stuff up there in the northern part of the country.
Centerra Gold's there with Caliber,
right?
Centerra,
right.
So yeah, I mean, look, it's perspective, and up until recently, it was wide open for business. So I think it will revert back to that.
Yeah, I think so. And the Hondurases and the Guatemalas and the El Salvadors and that type is probably not too interesting at this point. But Costa Rica is a joke, as you know, and Panama probably shut down at this point. But it's interesting. You mentioned the project there. We know an excavator operator that's at the project. So it's interesting, some of the photos and some of the stuff he shared. So anyway, moving on, tell us about the Rio2 shareholder roster. how much do you own, and what key backers do you have on the ship?
Well, it's still early days, but ourselves, management, the two largest shareholders on the board are myself and Albrecht Schneider. Albrecht was the founder of Atacama Pacific. So collectively, the board and management team have about 30% of the company. I own about just under 15% of the company today. You know, outside of that, we've got an interesting shareholder registry, because when we came across Atacama Pacific, their biggest shareholder at the time was Van Eck, the ETF, and Van Eck decided to support this transaction and decided to also participate in our last financing. And I think up until recently, they were at a position of about 13% of the company. Then we have a smattering of institutional investors underneath that, but just a handful, probably half a dozen. Right. And then we have some pretty close associates that have got probably another 10 or 15% of the company. So it's fairly tight, although you wouldn't know it when you look at our share price. So, but that's, you know, that's one thing that I always say, you can't control what's going on, but for whatever reason, we've got some loose stock that's been coming into the market since we completed this transaction. I've got no idea where that's coming from. But anyway, it is what it is, and you know, we just got to perform, keep going, do what we say we're going to do, and the rest will fall into place.
Absolutely. And you know, the good thing is I think here we got some strong hands, and some of our readers and listeners are pretty strong hands, and so they're, you know, we watched the company for some time and watched it where it was, and watched it come down, and we finally said, you know what, this is where we better pull the trigger. And so a couple months ago we did recommend the company. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, and you know, if there's some weak hands out there willing to part with their shares, I think there's some picker-uppers on the other side.
Exactly, and you know, that's the thing about, you know, I mean, everybody, I hate it when I hear it, but everybody gets up at these conferences, you know, the CEOs that do the presentations say, oh, we're significantly undervalued. Well, the market's the market, you know, and I hate that comment, because at the end of the day, the market will value you the way the market sees you. And so all you can do is make sure you don't make mistakes, make sure you deliver what you say you're going to deliver, and the rest will work its way out. That's my opinion.
No, absolutely. No, that's correct. You know, referencing back to Nicaragua, the air gap from $800,000 piece of real estate to $220,000, that's the type of air gap we're talking about. So, and quite honestly, if you look at the shares of a number of these companies listed on the TSX and TSXV, you'll see some similar playouts. Yeah. So Alex, moving on to another subject. Outside of Rio2, give us a name or two of a junior that you actually like and have respect for.
Wow. Oh, I don't know. Wow. You know, I'm heavily invested in this, in the gold space, but in us. That's what I'm invested in, is us.
Right.
And the reason I do that is because I'm backing us, right? And there's so few management teams out there that I could honestly feel that I'd feel comfortable backing. So I've steered away from having a broad portfolio of investments. But no, there are good people out there. I mean, you know, running junior companies. There's some good junior companies doing things, but can I pick one? Probably not. I mean, you guys are looking at it more from that perspective guys like Mark Turner at IKN, looking at things and pontificating on what they see in management teams, etc. But I can't really put my finger on one right now that I can say, well, that's a great team. But because there are a few out there, they're not all bad in respect to what I was saying before. But I just you got me there.
Right. No, and they're not all created equal, and certainly Mark does a nice job of making sure that people are in line, and we've of course and we've had a tough time too at different times from 2015 till now. Everybody gets gamed in the market at some point, and we're in the process of cleaning up some of ours as well.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to probably say is people like yourself, Mark Turner, Brent Cook, Joe Mazumda, who works with Brent Cook. I mean, that's who your listeners should be listening to. They have a pretty broad understanding of what's going on in the market. They generally tend to direct people in the right direction from the point of view of not only assets but also management. So yeah, I'm probably the last one because Rio2 is a mind building company. That's what we intend to be, and so a lot of things that are going on right now are mainly in the exploration space, and it's not really my game, exploration.
Sure. No, absolutely, and it's interesting the different situations that exist, and I'll save my comments on it because there's our readers and listeners already know our positions and know stuff that we've talked about in an extra ordinary fashion, including Rio2 as of late. So, Alex, moving on to a different subject. So you watch the big market. Where are we today in your view, and are we at the end of this big market cycle?
Well, as you know, I'm on Twitter, and I pontificate not about Rio2, but about things in general. It's where we are in gold, precious metals, really is tied to the Fed and their actions, and also the strength of the US dollar. All this flip-flopping that's going on, everything's pretty volatile, as you know. Trump tweets something one day and the market's up, and then it's down, and then it's sideways, and it's all over the place. And the dollar's relatively strong. I just think the Fed is hell-bent on what they call normalization of interest rates. I just think they have this thing in their mind that the interest rates were at zero for too long, and they need to be probably somewhere in the order of 2 to 3%, and they're going to be hell-bent on taking it there. So I think there's another interest rate rise in December, as everybody else, I think, predicts. Some people think it's going to slow down next year. I think I'm reverting to what they indicated a few months ago, that they'll do probably another 3 next year, and then we'll see what happens, right? But
right.
Obviously, the other thing that's going on in the background, and the elephant in the room, is the debt. The debt's ticking up. It's probably a month or two away from hitting 22 trillion. So to me, that recipe of high interest rates, huge debt, equity markets, the general equity markets that have just been frothy and at all-time highs, something's going to give, and it's not going to be pretty, whatever happens. It should be positive for precious metals. We all think that, but I think we still got a bit of sideways movement. And once again, remember what I said at the beginning, the gold price since 2013 has tracked pretty well around the $1,200 mark. So it's not bad. When
right.
People, I've been watching this sector, particularly lithium, cobalt, all vanadium and all that, and the highs, the lows, and the cryptos and the marijuanas, and everything goes through these flame outs and, hot periods, and, it's like the biggest roller coaster you've ever seen. Well, the good thing about gold, it doesn't do that. Gold to me is a currency that's just been tracking at that 1200 mark. And when something happens to the lead currency, which is the US dollar, which we all think will be to the negative, then you'll start to see gold track up. Now, where's it going to go? Who knows? I mean, track up might be to 1400 and find a new base there. I got no idea because I don't have a crystal ball. But I just think that we're in a good spot in precious metals, and we just got to hold our ground, and we'll see our time in the sun again. And hopefully, the next time round is that there's some positive performances that don't scare investors away.
Right.
Again.
No, I think it's and I think it's coming. I think it'll be there, and if I manage to pick up some additional ounces by the end of the year of gold, that would be helpful for anybody's portfolio at this point, given what's coming down the pipe. And it's difficult to manage these types of things, especially from a newsletter type business. It's very difficult to consider where we're at, and we're trying to do a good job of cleaning up our portfolios and slowing down, going more to cash and going more to precious metals, and getting prepared for what's going to come, and as well as putting on some nice long-term shorts on some of these stocks that are just going to get wasted when it does come down. So on that subject, just kind of spilling in a little bit back to natural resources. So folks often consider collateral damage from the big market decline. So how do you think natural resource equities will kind of fare this time?
When there's just frame that again. I mean, when there's a market correction, or with all these dynamics that are going on with the dollar and the Fed and all that sort of thing.
So for example, Alex, so like if you look at what happened in 2000 with the precious natural resource sector, more or less, 2000, 2001, how that reacted as the big market came down, and then compare that to 2008, it was completely different. And so my thoughts are there's kind of two sides. Is when equities get washed out, every equity gets washed out for a time. But then the argument is in 2000, 2001, some of these equities, specifically in natural resources, actually did not decline very much at all.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's typically a decline in all equities, which includes resource stocks. But then there's a flight to hard assets, right? Once people leave paper investments, a la shares, they tend to fly into hard assets, which is where you see commodities start to be an attractive destination for investment. And then the flow on from that is to companies that produce or in the commodities game, explore or produce commodities. So yeah, you see a depression in resource stocks, but resource stocks tend to be the first out, the first to rise. And I totally agree with you. So yeah, I see that happening. The issue, that we've had for the last, 10 years or more. Once again, I'm not a financial whiz, but since ETFs have been in place, that's been a bit of an issue, because obviously when we've had these turnarounds in commodities, people can flock to either the metal itself and buy the metal, or it can buy an ETF, right, which is a basket of companies and products and whatever. So then it takes away the attraction for people to come in and invest in individual companies, right? So that's a challenge the industry has faced, over the last few years, and will continue to face going forward, because that's probably where you'll see the first flight of money will come into the metal and then also into ETFs before it starts to flow into individual mining stocks.
Right, and it'll be interesting to see how those ETFs hold up when things really hit the fan, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. So moving on to another subject. So you've probably noticed that we do a little bit of recently for the last year and a half, 2 years or so, we've done a bit of work on the situation related to uranium supply. What's your view on this mining business, and do you believe the nuclear power industry has a role to play going forward on a global basis?
Look, I'm not a big fan. The reason is because, um, uh, the gestation period for a nuclear power plant is like something like 10 years or so. And the cost of building one is billions of dollars, right? Several billions of dollars. So it's not something you can turn on quickly. And so, you have all this talk about alternative energy. We have all this battery technology and stuff for powering cars and other things, but at the end of the day, you got to plug that battery into the wall, and on the other side of the wall is either a coal-fired power station or a hydro scheme or something that's providing the electricity, right? Now, for that to be all those options to be replaced by nuclear, it's going to take a long time, irrespective of the will to do so. So I just see the market as relatively small. I mean, we saw that spurred up in uranium prices, 10 years or 8 years ago, and it was what it was. It's the same as what happened with cobalt. It's the same as sort of what's happened with lithium. You have these sort of times when people just think, no, everybody's going to use this material, and boom, they're in the product, and it skyrockets, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's all this production that's found somewhere in China or in some corner of the earth that is going to just cater for the demands of what's required. So it's just too volatile for me. I mean, I just don't follow the space that well, and because of the volatility. Once again, you don't see that volatility in gold. Gold is relatively stable because it behaves like a currency.
Right. No, I'll give you a pass, man, because I'm asking outside your realm, so to speak, on it. For us, we have a view of there's clearly at this point with the production cuts and the price of the mineral, that there is no doubt that there is a supply demand issue going forward. Now, in the United States, absolutely, it's highly costly and it's a long-term process. In places like China, India, Saudi Arabia, and places that Russia is pumping the market in terms of nuclear, and with countries like Japan starting to restart the reactors because they're an island nation that does not have many other alternatives, and with their situation regarding debt is a whole nother ball game. And recently for us, we've seen the French, which are heavy nuclear, delay from 2025 weaning themselves off nuclear to 2035. I see that going forward, depending on seeing what happens with these small modular reactors and the other technology that's being deployed by Rolls-Royce and NuScale Power, I see that there is certainly a supply-demand problem, and I do believe that nuclear has its place, because you can't turn off this infrastructure, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. It doesn't matter if it's in the U.S. or anywhere else. This stuff cannot be turned off anytime soon because it provides a baseload power that nothing else has been able to match. And so for us, I see in the next 5-10 years, I do see a supply-demand problem. I see a price rise, and I do see an equity rise as well. Now, post this cycle, I have no idea. I do believe that there is some issues, and depending on what happens with the technology and what other advancements happen in the battery space, post 2035, who knows what's going to happen. But it is interesting what has happened to the supply cuts and the different fundamentals that have just kind of occurred starting, really, quite honestly, 2017 onward have really kind of put us in a place where we like it. And as you know, these things are highly cyclical, just like your other stuff, whether it's talking about lithium or cobalt or whatever. So,
yeah, I mean, my brief time outside of the gold space has been in copper, which I talked about Chariot Resources and the Mina Justa project here in Peru. And I remember back in 2004, 2005, when we bought the asset, there were all these analysts making these predictions about the copper demand and supply demand curves and all that sort of thing. And
Sure.
I watched all that. None of them were right.
Right.
So that's the thing with commodities. It's to me it's pretty hard to predict. The thing I like about gold is that if you find a good gold project, something that's easy to get going, good infrastructure, simple metallurgy, for example, you can build it for relatively cheap. And that's the benefit of the gold business, is it's a simple business. Copper's more difficult. If you look at the capex is involved in turning on a copper project, they're typically in the hundreds of millions plus. But if we look back at our track record with La Arena, we built the starter project La Arena $50 million, right? Now you can't do that in most other commodities. So in gold, I think, you have to have things working in your favor, like metallurgy, infrastructure, ease of
cost.
etc. Yeah, so you need that, but you can do it. You can do it, and it's kind of neat. It's kind of neat because then if you can get into production, there are some good profits to be made if you can operate at a reasonable cost of production.
Absolutely. No, and I think that from what I've seen, you guys are working that direction to where you'll have that exact scenario that you mentioned there. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. So besides Rio2, the minerals that Rio2 has, which on your project is pretty clean. So what other, is there any other minerals that you see that actually really have fundamentals going forward over the next 5 years? I mean, the lithiums, the cobalts, I mean, this stuff that's pumped, do you really see this stuff holding up?
No, I don't, because you know why? Because technology changes. I mean, the thing that I was made aware of recently, just through doing research, was this product called graphene, and graphene is like a graphite type product, and it can be made out of just about anything. It's not a rare material, but graphene is starting to be looked at from a battery technology perspective, and it's supposed to be or supposed to have better and more efficient ways of storing energy than lithium has. It's also used in water filtration and other things. So, I mean, what I see in that sector is just changing of technology and substitution. So right now, lithium's hot, lithium batteries, that's what it is. But, somebody along the way is going to come up with something cheaper and lighter, and lithium is going to fall to the wayside. It's the same with cobalt. It's the same. I think with all those sorts of metals can be substituted, replaced, or whatever. A lot of people will argue that's not possible, but I think that's what technology is all about. So the good thing about, again, I'm going to gravitate back to precious metals. You can't substitute gold. Gold is gold, and it has a place. And really, once again, I believe it's a form of currency. So you don't see these same fluctuations that you see in the in those hot metals. So I don't see it going on forever, no, and mainly because of technology. I think these things will be substituted. People have been trying to find substitutes for copper for a long time and still haven't been very successful in doing that. But if that ever happens, then copper will fall to the wayside as well, because it can be substituted. So, so
well, they say
I've got with those metals. or products.
Well, Alex, they say that you're able to fire up a nice supercomputer in Iceland or somewhere cold and turn out Bitcoin that's the equivalent of gold. So it'll be. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, we actually did have for a time we actually had in the portfolio a graphene or a high quality graphite company that we actually made some money on. I'm not sure it hasn't been doing too well recently, but we did make a nice return on it. But yeah, it's interesting to see how these technologies will play out, and for the folks who are heavy duty on the vanadiums and the lithiums, et cetera, you better get something going now. You better lock in some discounts. You better lock in some contracts. You better get the prices locked in, because I don't see it lasting.
I totally agree with you. And I'm old enough to know the last vanadium boom, which happened while I was living in Australia, and I think it was around when was it, the mid '90s or so, and it was when cell phones. It was all based around cell phones. Oh, okay, there's going to be gazillion cell phones around the world, and they're all going to use vanadium. So vanadium is now the thing. And there were all these projects built, and there was a couple in Australia built, but within 2 or 3 years, boom, it all was over. All right, cell phones still were being produced, but this whole vanadium boom of how vanadium was going to be used for all these cell phones. So now I'm hearing, vanadium, but now it's vanadium is also used in steel making, so which is more general than EVs and stuff like that. But to me, it's just these surges. It's like a tidal wave, comes and it goes.
Right. No, absolutely. And the interesting thing is too is most of this technology, there's iPhones in your cars and these different products, batteries and just random stuff that you have in your house. All this stuff's coming from the ground generally. I mean, you can grow some of it. Some of it might be the sun, some might be the river, some might be the wind. But the fact of the matter is, this stuff's coming out of the ground. So you better step up and embrace just the fact that we're still dependent as a consumer of our modern life. We're still dependent on the stuff that comes from these projects coming out of the ground. So it's certainly interesting. So we're almost done. So back to Rio2. Give us the outlook going forward to progress, community outreach, permitting going into 2019, 2020.
Well, it all depends on availability of funds and money, and we're going to need some more. But basically, what we intend to do, and we're drilling right now, is we're going to come up with a revised resource estimate at the end of Q1 of 2019. The idea of that is that we believe there were the adequacy of drilling in the starter pit area where we want to start operations was not as good as we wanted, and also we feel that there were high-grade structures in that area that weren't adequately picked up. So we're busily drilling those, and you'll start to see a flow of information on that shortly. Once that's finished, then we intend to do a little bit more metallurgical test work. There's been quite a lot of work done in the past. We're going to do our engineering work, and we're going to try and come up with a feasibility study. The project had a pre-feas completed in 2014, so we're going to do a feasibility study, which is going to have our signature on it from the point of view of what we think we're going to be able to build at Phoenix, and that should be ready hopefully at the end of Q3 or beginning of Q4 of next year. And then once that's in place, then we'll be filing and preparing the EIA for approval, which will go into place during 2020, 2021. You have the EIA and then the permitting process. So we're hoping that we're going to get to a point where we have all our permissions in place to make a construction decision for 2022. Okay, so there's still 3 years of time that we need to go through. Now, that's what I was talking about before. What we continue to do, even though, we're firmly focused on this asset, is we're looking at other opportunities. We continue to talk to other companies. We're continually looking at projects that belong to bigger companies that they may not want. The good thing is we get included in processes, although being in a process is not much fun. You'd rather try and come to terms with a company without having to go into a process. But anyway, we do get invited to processes, and we continue to look. And because of our track record and background, we do, even though things are tough, we do have the ability to find money for the right opportunity. We just got to keep heading in that direction. And
Right.
but we're a junior company, so we're gonna go through some bumps, but it is, it comes with the space.
Right. Absolutely. So why should investors look at Rio2 right now, and what would you say to those considering getting on board with Rio2?
Well, I think, look, the most important thing, as we discussed earlier on, it's all about backing management to create wealth, right? Not only for shareholders, but for themselves. And as you know, we've got significant skin in the game. We're not doing this because we're going to earn a nice fat salary. We're doing this because we are shareholders and significant shareholders. So really, if you become a shareholder of Rio2 at this time, you join us in our voyage of trying to build a sizable precious metals company. It's all about being in the right place at the right time. I'm convinced of that, with a little bit of luck. So, but for a team like ours, with the track record that we have, not only technically but also in the capital markets from an investor perspective, capital markets from a lender perspective, we've got all that. We've got all the ingredients. We just got to find the right projects to do that. Now, Phoenix is a part of the jigsaw puzzle. It's not the be all and end all. It will be a mine. I'm convinced of it. In fact, by hook or by crook, we're going to build a mine at Phoenix. I'm telling you that now. But we're looking at other things. So join us on the journey if that's what you want to do. We're very transparent. We're an open book from a management perspective. Anybody can come and visit me in my office if they're in Peru, or they can come and call me or talk to me at any time, and I'm happy to talk to them. So we're an open book, and I think that's all we can do. And hopefully because of that, we attract people to our story.
Well, Alex, I think you nailed it, and I think folks should really take a hard look at the company at these stages and at these prices. I think it's a good place to get started. So, Alex, it's been fun, and we appreciate you coming on. And take care.
Yeah, no, thanks for the time. It's been a bit. I've rambled on a bit on some of these points, but keep the faith. I think precious metals is the place to be over the next 2 to 3 years. Once we have this washout that's coming happen, and who knows, it could go longer than that. Keep the faith, and let's all hope we do well from an investment perspective in whatever we're invested in.